Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Now that my obligatory informative videos are done for the day, it's time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. And earlier I saw a video by Mark Lobliner, aka Mark Pocketliner, over at Tiger Fitness, where he made a video saying that people, just overcomplicate getting big, making gains, getting swole, reaching maximum jactitude. And essentially he's right. Now, I feel like what he said in the video really only applies to beginners. But to be honest, anyone who's going to be hanging out on a supplement site like his buying tons of supplements probably is a naive beginner. So there's some truth to that. And, even though Mark is kind of maybe a bit of a shady businessman involved in the snake oil industry trying to get everybody shekels, I think at the end of the day, he still really does want people to make gains. He still wants people to make progress. Mark himself trains hard. He knows how to train. He knows how to eat. I mean, he does get gains. He does know what he's doing, and he's a reasonably strong guy who understands the need for the basics. And I'll give credit where credit is due for that. And he went off into a long diatribe about dieting. And a lot of it had to do with, I guess, fat loss and consistency. But he did start off kind of on the point about gains. And one of the things that he talked about was that someone that he trains, someone that he works with, that they did legs. And afterwards, they did 3 sets of calves. And he told the guy, he's like, this is just kind of an afterthought. Because really, squats work your calves. And Mark is right. If you guys go look at the EMG data, I mean, you could look at EMG data or you could just look at common sense and just look at how the body works. It is impossible for you to squat without contracting your calves. Right? If you think about the movement pattern itself, there's no movement pattern to where you could train the quads with any appreciable weight that doesn't also work the calves. It can't be done. Right? The body works as a unit. And I love how he kind of highlighted that point because that's something you see missed in the bodybuilder world, which is where he comes from. Bodybuilders seem to have this crazy, insane, like it's a borderline delusional idea that you can isolate muscles, right? They use words like isolation. I mean, it's insane. It's literally insane. And it shows a complete lack of understanding of even the most basic things about the human body, which goes to show you can be a bodybuilder and not know shit about human anatomy or physiology. Literally, you'd be #1 in the world. They think things like you can isolate muscles. It's insane. It's insane. Completely ludicrous idea. But the point that he made is that, yeah, anytime you work the quads, you will work the calves. And when you go look at stuff like EMG data, like look at the stuff Brett Contreras did, looking at all the different EMG stuff that he did. And I'm not saying EMGs are the be-all, end-all. They can get you in the ballpark, but they can't always tell you, hey, this exercise is better than another. But they can tell you if a muscle's being worked pretty effectively or not. And everyone who looks at the data and understands it agrees with that. They can tell you if a muscle's being worked hard or not. Now, we could argue that you can't say, oh, that this proves that this works 3% better than this one, right? We can't always do that. But we can certainly tell if a muscle is a primary mover or not on EMG data and how hard it's being contracted within a reasonable amount. Yeah, and the actual EMG data, and again, we can't always say that it's that accurate, but it consistently shows that back squats with a barbell actually work the calves more than most forms of calf raises. Now, again, is it proof that it works them more? Probably not. It's just that it registers more in that particular EMG study that he did. But we know that it's at least in the ballpark, if not possibly better than most calf raises for recruiting the gastrocnemius, the larger part of the calf, right? Squats. That's why guys ask me all the time when they do see my calves when I'm in shorts. They ask, what do you do for your calf? I'm like, well, genetics, but it's also squats and deadlifts. I mean, squats and deadlifts work your calves. And yeah, guys will say, well, you've got Omar Issoff, Team No Calves. Well, Omar has terrible calf genetics, right? When you have bad genetics for a body part, really bad genetics for a body part, particularly something like calves, just because you're training it doesn't mean it's going to get massive. And I mean, it doesn't mean that squats and deadlifts don't work the calves. It's just that Omar doesn't have a lot of muscle fibers in that area. He's not gifted there. Doesn't mean it's not working. But Mark made a great point there. And he came over and talked about that with other stuff, that people will obsess over things like, well, how do I get big arms? And he'll look at him and be like, well, I don't know, maybe you need to work on your flat bird chest. Because realistically, I mean, how often do you see someone who has a massive chest who doesn't have big triceps? How frequently, and I'm not saying this one you actually do see from time to time, how frequently do you see someone with a big wide back with no biceps, unless they built their back from deadlifting, right? Now, it might be the exception if they built it from deadlifting, but the deadlift also does work the lats. Again, go look at your EMG data. Deadlifts, at least on the EMGs, usually read higher than most back exercises for the lats, right? It's crazy stuff. That your body works as a unit. And as Mark pointed out correctly, generally speaking, if someone is big, unless it's someone who's been a pure upper body bro, if they're big in one place, they tend to be big all over. If you're well developed in one place, you're going to be well developed all over. Same thing with body fat distribution. You don't see a guy with ripped abs who has flabby fat arms. You don't see a guy with shredded arms with striations all in them who has a big fat gut. Body fat works to some extent the same way too. We all have fat storage patterns, but your body is still one unit. But definitely when it comes over to muscle mass, it's one unit. And it's not to say that some specialized work doesn't help, and it's not to say certain exercises can't help certain muscles a little more than others. I mean, I do plenty of assistant and accessory work myself, right? It matters, but realistically speaking, your arms will go from bench press. Your chest should grow from bench press. If you're doing it correctly, with good progressive overload, you build a strength base. And it's kind of like I throw those strength standards out all the time. If you hit all 5 of those strength standards that I give, you're going to look like you lift walking down the street top to bottom, right? Now, you may not look like a bodybuilder. You may not look like a guy on the cover of a magazine. In fact, you probably won't. In fact, I can almost guarantee you won't if you barely hit those strength standards and you're drug-free. But you're going to look like you lift. You're going to be pretty well developed. Right? At least the big 5 have a certain strength standard there. You're going to have size to go with that. And that's kind of what he points out, that our body tends to be a unit. Yes, you can have different genetics that will affect these things. Yes, you can have different ratios, meaning for one guy, the bench press might work his chest more than his triceps compared to another guy. Right? But they're all going to grow. It's all going to grow. If you're building a base on your big, heavy compound movements, pretty much every muscle in your body is going to grow to a greater or lesser extent, but it's all going to grow. The key to building whatever body part you're talking about is to build a base, particularly for novices. Now, when you get more advanced, granted, there's a greater need and a greater benefit for specialization the longer you've been training and the more size and strength and everything else that you put on. But the idea is generally the same. Get good at the basics. Build your foundation with basic exercises. That is where 90% of your size is going to come from. And it's not to say you can't do some smaller work or specialized work as icing on the cake, but it really is icing on the cake most of the time. And what he pointed out, people overcomplicate programming, of when we get into this stuff about full body versus splits and things like that, stuff I talk about also. At the end of the day, you can make gains on all of them. All right, and that's the ironic part, is that we do have good data over the years showing full body for most drug-free lifters, particularly the first few years. You're going to put on more size than on a split routine. You generally will. But does that mean that a person couldn't get maximum gains on a split routine? No, they still could. If they put in the work consistently and have progressive overload there, they could still pull it off. It could still be done. It's just not going to be quite as efficient. That's all we're talking about. But then again, you'll see people on the other end who are big on the splits actually say silly stuff like you can't grow on a full body, which is ludicrous. Ludicrous statement. But, as he pointed out, as long as you really enjoy what you're doing and you're consistent and you're progressing on your basic exercises, you're going to get bigger. You'll make progress. And that's kind of what he pointed out. In general, motivation and consistency are more important than these nuanced details, particularly for those of you who are struggling with compliance to begin with. And that's where he jumped into diet. He'll say, look, we can argue about all these different diets all day long, but if you want to talk about something like putting someone on a keto diet or a paleo diet or intermittent fasting who can't put down the Twinkies, that's not going to work. Right? That's not going to work, because if they can't even do something as simple as just not eating garbage all day long and they can't quit stuffing Twinkies in their face, or you have people who are too lazy to actually go into a restaurant and have to we have a problem in this country, as again Mark pointed out, where people can't even get out of their car to get food. They have to go to a drive-through to get fast food because they're that lazy. Good luck getting them to follow any sort of structured diet that restricts entire categories of food. or that restricts them from eating during large segments of the day. Like, you really think you're going to get someone to intermittent fast until 2 o'clock every single day who can't put down their Twinkies and their Big Macs and their milkshakes and everything else? They can't quit shoving shit into their mouth. Do you really think that they're going to be compliant on any sort of really restrictive eating program? No, they need to focus on the basics and learn to just quit eating so much garbage. Same thing with training. Well, we could argue about, well, how could you get bigger arms or whatever it is that you're trying to pursue, but maybe you should just be consistent with the basics first. If you have no base, worrying about little nuanced details like that instead of just putting on size overall by being consistent with a good program, probably a waste of your time. And Mark has a good point there. And again, I will give props for actually giving good information for beginners, not necessarily always true for the more advanced lifter with what he said, but good for beginners, and not trying to get anybody's shekels advertising through the video, so I'll give credit for that. Give credit where credit is due, and that's towards somebody I don't even like. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.